The crystal towers of New Karate burned against the purple sky as massive bioships descended from orbit like falling meteors. Each Devourer vessel was the size of a city block, their black chitinous hulls pulsing with veins of sickly green light. Ambassador Veltar watched in horror from the command center as his people's energy shields sparked and failed under the endless bombardment. "Defense grid at 12%, reported his aide, her crystalline voice cracking with fear. "The capital city shields won't hold much longer." Through the transparent walls of the command spire, Veltar could see the nightmare unfolding across his homeworld. The Devourers had landed massive harvester creatures that moved like giant spiders, each one the size of a skyscraper. Their metal claws tore through buildings while organic tubes extended from their bellies, literally drinking the life from everything they touched. Trees withered and died in seconds. Lakes turned black and empty. Even the air seemed to grow thin wherever these monsters walked. "Sir, incoming transmission from the outer colonies," another aide called out, his form flickering with panic. "Zelani Prime has gone dark. That's the fourth world this week." Veltar closed his 6 eyes, feeling his crystalline body fracture slightly under the stress. The Karate Union had lasted for 10,000 years, spreading across 15 star systems through peaceful trade and diplomacy. They had never needed weapons of war because they had never met anyone who couldn't be reasoned with. Until now. The Devourer swarm didn't negotiate. They didn't communicate. They simply consumed everything in their path and moved on to the next world like a plague of living starships. Their bioarmor adapted to every weapon the galaxy possessed. Energy beams that could crack planets just made them stronger. Missiles bounced off their hulls like raindrops. Even the mighty Altrian battle cruisers had been torn apart like paper toys. "Patch me through to all emergency frequencies," Veltar commanded, moving to the central transmitter. "All channels, maximum power." His aide hesitated. "Ambassador, the Galactic Council specifically ordered us not to." "The Galactic Council is debating while our children die," Veltar snapped, his usually calm demeanor cracking. "Open the channel." The massive transmitter array atop the command spire hummed to life, sending Veltar's desperate plea across the galaxy on every frequency known to science. His message would reach the core worlds, the outer rim territories, and even the unexplored sectors where strange new species might be listening. "This is the Karate Union broadcasting on all channels. The Devourer swarm has consumed 3 of our worlds. Our weapons cannot penetrate their adaptive armor. If anyone receives this transmission, please, we are dying." Meanwhile, 4 to 7 light-years away, Commander Jack Harrison was enjoying what might be his last quiet morning for a very long time. The Earth's orbital defense station hummed peacefully around him as he sipped coffee and watched the blue marble of humanity's homeworld rotate slowly below. The newly formed Terran Defense Fleet floated in formation nearby, 50 gleaming warships that represented humanity's first serious attempt at interstellar military power. "Commander Harrison to the bridge, Priority 1, the intercom crackled, interrupting his thoughts. Jack arrived on the bridge to find his communications officer, Lieutenant Beth Cooper, staring at her console with wide eyes. The normally unflappable woman looked like she'd seen a ghost. "What's the situation, Lieutenant?" Jack asked, settling into his command chair. "Sir, we're picking up an alien distress signal. Multiple transmissions, actually. They're broadcasting on every frequency we monitor and several we don't." Beth's fingers flew across her controls. The translation software is working overtime, but the message is clear: they're under attack by something they call the Devourer swarm. The main screen flickered to life, showing a star map with pulsing red indicators marking dead worlds. Jack whistled softly as he counted the casualties. 15 systems completely dark. That's billions of lives. Lieutenant Tom Bradley, the tactical officer, pulled up additional data. According to their transmissions, this swarm has adaptive technology. It learns from every attack and becomes immune to whatever hits it. The aliens are calling it unstoppable. "Patch me through to Fleet Command," Jack ordered. Within minutes, Admiral Robert Kane appeared on the screen, his weathered face grim but determined. "Admiral, are you seeing this?" Jack asked. "Every screen in the solar system is lit up with these alien signals," Kane replied. "The President called an emergency session. We're the only military force that can respond quickly enough to matter." Jack felt his pulse quicken. "Orders, sir?" 50 ships ready for immediate deployment, Commander. Full battle group with support vessels. We don't know what we're flying into, but we can't ignore a cry for help." Lieutenant Beth looked up from her station. "Sir, the alien transmissions are getting weaker. I think they're losing their broadcast stations." Jack turned to his crew, seeing the same determination in their eyes that he felt burning in his chest. Humanity had spent centuries wondering if they were alone in the universe. Now they knew they weren't, and someone needed their help. "Signal the fleet," he commanded, his voice carrying across the bridge. "All ships prepare for immediate hyperspace jump. We're going to answer that call." Within 6 hours, humanity's first interstellar war fleet vanished into the swirling vortex of hyperspace, leaving Earth behind as they raced toward an unknown enemy in the depths of space. Behind them, the blue world that had forged them in fire and struggle continued its ancient rotation, while ahead lay the greatest challenge the human race had ever faced. The karate sensor operators couldn't believe what their instruments were telling them. 50 unknown vessels had just torn through hyperspace at the edge of their dying system, emerging from the swirling vortex like ancient sea monsters rising from the depths. The ships were unlike anything in the galactic database, massive, brutal-looking constructs that seemed to have been built for war and nothing else. "Ambassador Veltar, you need to see this," called out sensor technician Kiravel, her crystalline form shimmering with excitement and fear. "These ships, they're not like anything we've encountered before." On the main display, the human fleet spread out in perfect formation. Each vessel looked like it had been carved from solid metal and anger. Their hulls were thick with lead armor plating that could probably stop a comet impact. Weapon ports bristled along their sides like the spines of some prehistoric beast. Where galactic ships were sleek and elegant, these newcomers were blunt instruments of destruction. The flagship in the center was particularly intimidating, a massive dreadnought that dwarfed most karate civilian vessels. Its hull was painted in simple gray and black, with no decorative elements or artistic flourishes. Just raw, functional power designed to deliver death to its enemies. "They're scanning us," reported another technician. "Very thorough scans. They're mapping our entire defense grid, planetary infrastructure, even our population centers." Ambassador Veltar felt a chill run through his crystalline form. "Are they hostile?" "I don't think so, sir. The scans seem protective? Like they're analyzing how to defend us rather than attack us." Before Veltar could respond, the communication array lit up with an incoming signal. The main screen flickered, and suddenly they were looking at the face of an alien creature unlike anything in the galactic records. The being had pale skin, short dark hair, and eyes that seemed to burn with an inner fire. Most disturbing of all, when it looked at them, Veltar felt like he was being studied by a predator. "This is Admiral Mike Roberts of the Terran Defense Fleet," the creature said, its voice deep and commanding. "We received your distress call. Point us toward the enemy." The command center fell silent. Ambassador Veltar's translator worked overtime to process the simple, direct statement. No diplomatic pleasantries. No requests for negotiation or payment. Just a straightforward offer to fight and die for complete strangers. You came?" Veltar managed, his voice cracking with disbelief. "But we are unknown to you. Our species has never met. Why would you risk your lives for strangers?" The human admiral's face split into what Veltar would later learn was called a smile, though it looked more like the expression a wolf might make before attacking. "Because it's the right thing to do." Within hours, the human fleet had taken defensive positions around the karate homeworld with military precision that made Veltar's head spin. Their ships moved like a school of predatory fish, each one knowing exactly where to be without apparent communication. The massive vessels positioned themselves at strategic points throughout the system, turning empty space into a fortress. Admiral Roberts transported down to the Karate Command Center for a face-to-face meeting, and Veltar was amazed by what he witnessed. The human walked into their atmospheric environment wearing only a simple breathing mask, no full environmental suit like every other species required. Their world's gravity was 30% higher than Earth normal, but Roberts moved as if it was nothing. The toxic elements in their air that would kill most galactic species seemed to barely affect him. "Impressive adaptation," Veltar commented as they walked through the crystal corridors. "Earth isn't gentle with her children," Roberts replied casually. "Makes us hard to kill." In the strategy room, Captain Rachel Davis spread holographic displays showing Devourer swarm attack patterns across multiple worlds. The humans studied the data with cold, calculating eyes that reminded Veltar of their automated defense computers, but with something far more dangerous behind them. "They are parasites," Davis concluded after reviewing hours of combat footage in just minutes. "Classic predator behavior. They adapt to counter whatever they face, become immune to standard tactics." She looked up at the assembled karate leadership with something that might have been a predatory grin. "But they've never faced humans before." The karate military advisors exchanged worried glances. "Captain Davis," one of them ventured, These creatures have consumed entire civilizations. Their bioships can adapt to any weapon we've ever seen. How can your species possibly? Because we don't fight fair, Roberts interrupted, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. We fight to win. On the tactical displays, the karate could see human engineering teams already working on their defense platforms, upgrading systems with technology that seemed both primitive and incredibly effective. The humans didn't use elegant energy matrices or sophisticated quantum weapons. Instead, they built massive kinetic cannons that could punch holes through small moons, missile systems that carried enough explosive power to crack continents, and defensive barriers made from materials so dense they seemed to bend space around them. Admiral, Veltar asked quietly, what kind of world creates warriors like you? Roberts looked out through the crystal walls at his fleet positioning itself for battle, his expression growing distant. The kind of world that teaches you to fight for what matters. Family. Friends. People you've never met who need help. He turned back to Veltar with those burning eyes. The kind of world that makes you understand, sometimes the only thing standing between civilization and monsters is someone willing to become a monster themselves. As if summoned by his words, proximity alarms began wailing throughout the command center. On every screen, the same terrifying image appeared, dozens of massive bioships emerging from hyperspace like hungry beasts drawn to the scent of prey. The Devourer swarm had arrived, and the galaxy was about to witness what happened when an unstoppable force met human stubbornness. The transformation of the karate system happened with a speed that left the crystalline beings stunned. Within 48 hours, human engineering teams had turned empty space into a killing field that would have impressed the galaxy's most feared military architects. Massive weapon platforms materialized at strategic points throughout the system, each one bristling with enough firepower to level a city. Shield generators the size of skyscrapers formed overlapping defensive barriers that could stop everything from asteroids to plasma bombardments. How did they build all this so quickly? Asked Science Officer Talven, watching through the command center's crystal walls as another human construction ship welded armor plating onto a defense station. Our estimates suggested this level of fortification would take months. Ambassador Veltar studied the tactical displays showing the growing network of human defenses. They brought everything with them. Look at those cargo ships, they're not carrying supplies. They're carrying entire prefabricated fortress components. The humans worked with mechanical precision that reminded the karate of their own automated manufacturing systems, except these were living beings operating with the efficiency of machines. Welding sparks flew in the vacuum as human workers in powered armor assembled gun emplacements that could punch holes through battleships. Their movements were synchronized, purposeful, deadly. On the training decks of the human ships, Commander David Parker was putting his Marines through exercises that made the karate observers physically ill. The humans practiced boarding actions in simulated environments that duplicated the toxic atmospheres and crushing gravity fields found on the galaxy's most hostile worlds. What should have killed them in minutes only made them sweat a little. Pressure suits compromised, switched to emergency air. Parker barked as his troops stormed through a training chamber filled with gas that would dissolve most species in seconds. The Marines barely slowed down, continuing their assault with the casual indifference of people walking through a light rain. One karate observer, military analyst Genka, watched in horror as human soldiers trained in a gravity field 3 times their homeworld's normal pull. They're carrying weapons and equipment that weigh more than most of our people, he whispered. How are they even moving? The humans weren't just moving, they were sprinting, diving, fighting with the same intensity they would show in normal conditions. When the artificial gravity was cranked up to 5 times Earth normal, they adapted by switching to powered exoskeletons that turned them into walking tanks. When the training chamber was flooded with radiation that would cook most galactic species, they simply donned heavier armor and kept going. Your species evolved on a death world, Veltar observed during a strategy meeting, his crystalline form flickering with a mixture of awe and fear. Admiral Roberts nodded casually, as if discussing the weather. Earth isn't gentle with her children. Gravity that crushes bones. Atmospheres that burn lungs. Weather that can freeze you solid or boil you alive. Predators that hunt in packs and never give up. He paused, looking at the tactical displays. Makes us hard to kill. Captain Amy Sullivan, the fleet's intelligence officer, stepped forward to brief the command staff. Her face was grim as she activated the holographic projector, showing scan results that made several karate advisors step backward in alarm. Long-range sensors confirm incoming Devourer presence. 3 full hive fleets converging on our position. Initial estimates put their numbers at over 600 bioships. The tactical display showed the approaching enemy forces as red dots swarming across the star map like angry insects. Each dot represented a living warship the size of a city block, armed with adaptive weapons and crewed by creatures that existed only to consume everything in their path. 600 ships against our 50, Sullivan continued, her voice steady despite delivering what should have been a death sentence. We'll be outnumbered roughly 20 to 1. Standard galactic doctrine would recommend immediate evacuation. The karate leadership exchanged panicked glances, their crystalline forms fracturing slightly under stress. 20 to 1 odds weren't a battle, they were an execution. Every military computer in the galaxy would calculate their chances of survival at essentially zero. But when Veltar looked at the human officers, he saw something that chilled him to his core. Instead of fear or resignation, their faces showed anticipation. Several of them were actually smiling, the same predatory expression he'd seen on Admiral Roberts' face during first contact. Good, Robert said quietly, his voice carrying a satisfaction that made the karate nervous. I was worried this would be too easy. The human command staff chuckled at their admiral's comment, sharing some private joke that the karate couldn't understand. These beings weren't just unafraid of impossible odds, they seemed to relish them. They looked like warriors who had spent their entire lives waiting for a fight worthy of their skills. Commander Parker leaned forward, studying the enemy formation data. Sir, recommend we focus our heaviest defenses on approach vectors 7 through 12. Force them to come through the asteroid field where our close combat doctrine gives us the advantage. Agreed. Sullivan, what's the ETA on those hive fleets? 18 hours, sir. They're pushing their biodrives harder than we've ever recorded. They want this system badly. Roberts turned to Ambassador Veltar, his burning eyes reflecting the tactical displays. Ambassador, I recommend you evacuate all civilian populations to your deepest bunkers. This is going to get messy. As the karate leadership rushed to implement evacuation procedures, Veltar remained behind, watching the human officers plan their defense with the calm efficiency of beings who had never met a problem they couldn't solve through applied violence. He began to understand something terrifying about these creatures. The humans weren't just from a death world, they were Deathworlders. Predators shaped by countless generations of survival against impossible odds. They didn't fear the darkness because they were the thing other species feared in the darkness. And now they had come to his system, bringing with them the promise that sometimes, when monsters threatened the innocent, the only answer was bigger monsters with better weapons and the will to use them. The edge of the karate system exploded into chaos as the Devourer swarm tore through the fabric of hyperspace. 600 bioships materialized in a writhing mass of organic horror that made even the humans pause for a moment. Each vessel looked like it had grown rather than been built, living architecture of bone and chitin that pulsed with veins of sickly light. The largest hive ships were over 2 kilometers long, their surfaces crawling with smaller organisms that served as both crew and ammunition. "Sweet Mother of Earth," whispered Lieutenant Brian Cooper from his position at the tactical station aboard the flagship Defiant. "They're even uglier in person." The bioships moved with predatory grace through space, their hulls shifting and adapting as they approached the human defensive line. Where normal ships would show weapon ports, these creatures revealed organic cannons that looked like massive insect eyes. Acidic projectiles began launching toward the human positions, each one designed to eat through armor and hull plating like it was made of paper. Admiral Roberts stood on the bridge of the Defiant, watching the approaching nightmare with the calm expression of a man who had seen worse odds and lived to tell about it. Around him, his crew worked with machine-like efficiency, preparing weapons systems that had been designed specifically for this moment. "Admiral," called out Communications Officer Kate Wilson, "all ships report ready for combat operations." Roberts opened the fleet-wide channel, his voice carrying to every human ship in the system. "All ships, this is Defiant Actual. Remember, we're not just fighting for the karate. We're showing the galaxy what humans do to bullies. Take us into the swarm." The human fleet surged forward in a coordinated charge that defied every rule of galactic naval warfare. Instead of maintaining safe distances and exchanging long-range fire, the Terran ships dove straight into the heart of the enemy formation like ancient cavalry charging into battle. Their engines blazed with white-hot fury as they accelerated toward certain death with the enthusiasm of people heading to a party. Captain Nick Stevens of the destroyer Hammer led the first wave, his ship's armored prow cutting through a bioship's flank like a sword through flesh. The organic vessel screamed, actually screamed, as human kinetic rounds tore through its living hull. But instead of retreating, Stevens pushed deeper into the swarm, his weapons blazing as smaller devourer creatures swarmed around his ship like angry wasps. "This is Hammer." Stevens' voice crackled over the communications. Their armor adapts to energy weapons, but good old-fashioned bullets still work just fine. The battle quickly turned into the kind of close-quarters nightmare that human military doctrine had prepared for. When long-range weapons proved ineffective against adaptive bioarmor, the humans did what humans always did: they got creative and violent. Captain Jake Morrison of the cruiser Vengeance found himself facing a hive ship 3 times his vessel's size. The bioship's organic cannons had adapted to his plasma torpedoes, growing armor that absorbed the energy and made the creature stronger. So Morrison did something that made the karate observers scream in horror: he rammed his ship directly into the enemy vessel's core. This is vengeance. Morrison's final transmission echoed across the fleet. Tell my wife I kept my promise. The cruiser punched through the hive ship's hull like a bullet through an egg, its nuclear reactor detonating in a blast that vaporized both vessels and took out 2 smaller bioships in the explosion. The karate couldn't believe what they were seeing. Humans were using their own ships as weapons, turning every vessel into a potential missile. When conventional boarding shuttles couldn't penetrate the Devourer bioarmor, Commander Paula Miller came up with a solution that perfectly embodied human tactical thinking. Instead of trying to dock with the enemy ships, her Marines used breaching charges to blow holes in the hulls and then jumped across the vacuum of space wearing nothing but combat armor and pure determination. Miller to all boarding teams, she called out as she led her Marines through a corridor that was literally trying to digest them. Remember your training, these things bleed just like everything else. The inside of a Devourer hive ship was a nightmare of living walls that oozed acid and ceiling-mounted creatures that dropped down like organic landmines. The air was so toxic it would have killed most galactic species in seconds, but the human Marines just switched to internal oxygen and kept fighting. When their energy weapons proved ineffective, they pulled out backup weapons that hadn't been seen in galactic warfare for centuries: explosive shells, flamethrowers, and good old-fashioned steel bayonets. The tide began to turn when the humans started employing tactics that the Devourer swarm's collective intelligence simply couldn't process. These weren't the elegant, predictable strategies that galactic civilizations used. This was controlled chaos, creative destruction applied with surgical precision by beings who had learned to fight on a world where everything was trying to kill them. Lieutenant Colonel Pete Davis pioneered the suicide run maneuver, diving his damaged frigate into the center of a bioship formation and detonating his entire missile payload at point-blank range. The explosion chain reacted through 3 hive ships, their organic hulls unable to adapt quickly enough to the overlapping blast waves. Commander Helen Torres came up with the boarding torpedo technique, cramming Marines into armored pods and firing them directly into enemy hulls like living ammunition. Her troops carved their way through hive ships from the inside out, leaving behind scenes of devastation that the bioship's adaptive systems couldn't repair fast enough. But it was the humans' sheer refusal to die quietly that finally broke the Devourer swarm's confidence. Even when outnumbered 20-1, even when facing creatures that had consumed entire civilizations, the humans kept fighting with a stubborn determination that bordered on insanity. As bioships began fleeing toward hyperspace, their collective mind finally understanding that they had encountered something new in the galaxy: predators that thrived on impossible odds and got stronger when cornered. The silence that followed the battle was almost as terrifying as the fighting itself. Where moments before space had been filled with screaming bioships and explosive combat, now there was only the quiet hum of human engines and the distant glow of cooling debris. The surviving Devourer vessels limped toward the edge of the system like wounded animals, their organic hulls scarred and bleeding strange fluids into the vacuum. Admiral Roberts watched through the bridge viewports as the last hive ship vanished into hyperspace, its collective mind finally accepting something that had never happened before in their centuries of conquest: total defeat. The creatures that had devoured entire civilizations were running away from a species they'd never encountered, carrying with them the memory of beings who fought harder when the odds got worse. "Damage report," Roberts called out, though he could already see the cost written on his crew's faces. Lieutenant Brian Cooper's voice was hoarse from shouting orders during the battle. 13 ships lost, sir. Another 7 so badly damaged they'll need complete rebuilds. But 37 vessels are still operational. 37 ships out of 50. In galactic terms, it should have been considered a devastating loss. But Roberts had expected to lose everyone, so having 3/4 of his fleet still breathing felt like a miracle. More importantly, they'd broken something that the galaxy had considered unbreakable. "Begin search and rescue operations," he ordered. "Any human life pod gets priority recovery. After that, we help with karate casualties." What happened next surprised even the battle-hardened human crews. As their ships moved through the debris field, they discovered that several of the destroyed human vessels were still fighting. The destroyer Phoenix had been cut in half by a bioship's acid cannon, but her rear section was still operational, her crew using the wreckage as a makeshift weapons platform. The cruiser Stormwind had lost her main engines and most of her hull, but Commander Frank Williams and his people were still firing missiles from whatever launch tubes hadn't been melted. "This is Phoenix Actual," came Captain Dan Foster's voice over the communications, calm as if he was reporting the weather. "We're a little short on front hull section, but our guns still work fine." The rescue operations revealed something else that made the karate observers shake their crystalline heads in amazement. Human ships that should have been floating graveyards were instead filled with survivors who had kept fighting even when their vessels were dying around them. Crew members trapped in sealed compartments had jury-rigged life support systems from spare parts. Marines had turned damaged sections into defensive positions, ready to repel boarders even after their ship had been declared lost. Ambassador Veltar transported to the Defiant to personally thank Admiral Roberts, bringing with him authorization to access the entire karate treasury, enough wealth to buy several star systems. The crystalline being's form sparkled with genuine gratitude as he made his offer. "Admiral Roberts," Veltar said, his translator working to convey the depth of his emotion, "the Karate Union owes you a debt that can never be repaid. Our entire treasury, our technology, our resources, all of it is yours to claim." Roberts looked at the star chart spread across his ready room table, showing the locations of karate colonies, trade routes, and allies. But what interested him wasn't their wealth, it was the distress signals already lighting up his communications console. "Keep your money, Ambassador," Roberts said quietly. "What I need are star charts showing other species under threat." Veltar's form flickered with confusion. "Admiral, you've lost 13 ships and hundreds of your people. Your fleet needs repairs, replacements, supplies. What do humans gain from helping strangers? Why do you do this?" Roberts walked to the viewport, looking out at the stars that stretched endlessly in all directions. Somewhere out there, other civilizations were facing the same nightmare the karate had endured. Other species were broadcasting desperate calls for help that no one answered. "We gained the knowledge that we're not alone in wanting to do what's right," he said finally. "The galaxy's a big place, Ambassador. Plenty of room for friends." Within days, news of the Deathworlder fleet spread across galactic communication networks faster than hyperspace travel. The story grew with each telling: humans who charged into impossible odds, ships that fought even when cut in half, warriors who used their own vessels as weapons. Species that had cowered in fear before the Devourer swarm began to hope again. On distant worlds, alien leaders who had given up on military resistance started dusting off their emergency broadcast equipment. In systems under siege by pirates, slavers, and worse things, desperate messages began transmitting toward the outer rim where the humans patrolled. Captain Betty Murphy, Roberts' communications officer, monitored the growing flood of requests for aid from her station on the Defiant. The console that had been quiet for decades now lit up with distress calls from across the galaxy, each one representing billions of lives hanging in the balance. "Sir, we're getting calls from 12 different systems," she reported, her voice mixing exhaustion with excitement. "All requesting immediate assistance. The Thalen Republic is under attack by automated war machines. The Kashari colonies are facing some kind of energy parasites. And there's a distress signal from the Vegan Trade Union, they're being invaded by something that calls itself the Dark Collective." Admiral Roberts studied the star map showing the locations of each crisis, calculating distances, response times, and the odds of success. By any reasonable military analysis, his damaged fleet couldn't possibly help everyone. But reasonable military analysis had never stopped humans before. "How long until the fleet is ready for hyperspace?" he asked. 6 hours for emergency repairs, sir. 12 hours if you want the ships to be properly combat-ready." Roberts smiled, the expression making him look years younger despite the exhaustion and stress of the recent battle. It was the same predatory grin that had made the karate nervous, but now it carried something else, the promise of hope to anyone listening. "Signal the fleet, Captain," he ordered. "Emergency repairs only. We have work to do." As the Terran Defense Fleet prepared for their next jump to hyperspace, the karate worked frantically to complete a monument in their capital city. Carved from the finest crystal their world could produce, it bore a simple inscription in several Earth languages: "They came when called." The human fleet vanished into the swirling vortex of hyperspace, carrying with them a promise that would reshape the galaxy. When civilized beings cried out in the darkness, the Deathworlders would answer. *The E&D*.